100% sure that all of us are going to get the benefit in our day-to-day life. And in the capacity of founder and director of Speaking Cube, I would like to share that Speaking Cube will always be for all the projects for the benefit of mankind for both Navnalanda University and CIBS. Sir, thank you so much. Thank you once again for your words of wisdom, sir. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Chtristopher Willard, faculty, Harvard Medical School, a clinical psychologist and an educational consultant, and a multiple time TEDx speaker. He has been practicing mindfulness for about 20 years, and he has been teaching mindfulness for more than 12 years. He is a multi-talented personality and a good friend of mine who has always been there as far as mindfulness is concerned. And presently, along with the faculty position in Harvard Medical School, he is serving as a board of directors at the Institute of Meditation and Psychotherapy. Over to you, Chtristopher, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shamoli. It's a pleasure to be here. We became friends many years ago on LinkedIn, I believe, and have stayed in touch ever since then, and hopefully at some point getting to spend some time together in person. It's really an honor to be here and to follow you up, Dr. Lav. Wonderful to hear some of your words and perspectives as well, especially Buddhist perspectives on mindfulness, where of course so many of these practices and these concepts really begin to originate, and I hope that we can find some ways to collaborate at some point in the future. So I'm here, I'll just say a few words from my perspective about some of the American, some of the Western perspectives on mindfulness. And my belief that during these past few years, it's not surprising if we look at our culture, not just in the US, of course, but globally, that there's been suddenly this explosion in interest in mindfulness. If we look to history, we can see that every time things begin to shift in one direction in society, there often is a counterbalance as we become more and more busy, as we become more and more of a overwhelmed society, stressed out, multitasking, digital, modern age society, trying to do so many different things at once. It's no wonder at the same time that this interest in mindfulness and simply bringing our awareness to one thing at a time with deliberate intention has grown. And with it, of course, these amazing side effects that tend to come out of mindfulness. Less stress, better mental health, better functioning, more happiness. So many wonderful things that come out of this that our societies have been lacking as we undergo a mental health crisis around the world of all ages. And that hopefully with the introduction and reintroduction of mindfulness in this challenging time, we can start to shift some of that trajectory back toward more happiness, back toward more single tasking rather than multitasking. At the beginning of the pandemic, it became even more apparent how much an importance in mindfulness could be or would be. It was last March that things began to shut down here in the US. I remember sitting with my wife and my children. My children were home from school when they said it was just going to be 2 weeks that we were all home, and then we'd be back out of quarantine and back to work and so many things like that. And I turned to my wife and I said, I think the kids are always going to remember this time. The children will always remember this time. And my wife's job is actually, she's a medical historian. She studies the ways that plagues and pandemics change the course of history from ancient times all the way through the present. So she's been very interested in what's happening in the last year and a half and seeing many things as they come. many trends, many changes. And she just looked at me and she said, everyone's going to remember this pandemic time. They'll talk about the pandemic of 2020 in 100 years, maybe even 1,000 years. And I was thinking about this a lot, and at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember looking around online on social media, and so many people that I knew were posting things like, I'm going to learn 5 languages, or I'm going to run a marathon inside of my living room, running in place, or something like that. And thinking about all these things people wanted to do at the beginning of the pandemic, what they were going to do with all this free time. And I actually thought back a little bit to one of the greater Western teachers of mindfulness, Dr. John Kabat-Zinn. And he says, we've gone from human beings to becoming human doings. And how can we shift back a little bit so that we're human beings again, and not just doing all the time? And to me, at that point, so early in the pandemic, I thought, maybe the thing I want to do, that we all could stand to do a little bit in this pandemic, is maybe worry a little bit less about what it is that we want to do, and think more about how we want to be. How we want to be in terms of what are our values. Do we want to be that person that races off to the store, off to the market, takes that last bag of rice or that last little bit of food? Or do we want to be the kind of person who checks in with our neighbors and maybe says, hey, I'm going to the store. What can I pick you up from the store? What can I get you from the market today? And when we act in these ways, with deliberate mindfulness and compassion for our fellow human beings, and we know from the Dharma that the great bird arises, right? One wing of wisdom, one of compassion. How can we be more wise, more mindful, more compassionate, more deliberate in everything that we do? And what starts to happen as individuals when we act in these ways is that these changes actually slowly begin to spread to the people around us. So many of our emotions are contagious. Our negative emotions, stress is contagious, worry is contagious, sadness is contagious. More and more of the research that social scientists and that we psychologists are doing is on this idea of emotional contagion. But the amazing thing is that our positive emotions are also contagious. Happiness is contagious, joy, laughter. We all know what it's like to laugh when a laugh ripples around a room. Excitement is contagious, curiosity is contagious. And mindfulness is contagious and goes viral and actually spreads and accelerates other positive emotions at the same time. We know from the research that parents who practice mindfulness have better communication with their children, more happiness in the whole family, fewer accidents in the home. Just when one parent in a family begins to practice mindfulness. I work a lot in education. Educators who practice mindfulness, even if they never teach mindfulness to the students are calmer, they're performing better, they're coming to school more often, they're doing better on tests. I work as a psychologist, as a clinical psychologist. The patients heal faster when their therapists practice mindfulness, that doctors and medical professionals who practice mindfulness, they have greater trust with their patients who follow their orders and advice and get better faster as well. In recent years, we've been studying actually the ways that just simply people who live together roommates or people that are married to each other, when one person is practicing mindfulness, the people that they're living with are happier. And then if they stop practicing for a week, the people they live with get less happy. And so they're less satisfied with the relationship. So it's amazing to watch, actually, that the benefits of mindfulness are not just limited to us as individuals, but actually begin to spread out to the people around us. The ability to focus, the ability to be happier, better mood, better mental health, better physical health, stronger immune system. These begin to spread and shift outward from person to person to person. So at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember reading an article where someone was talking about how can we help our children in the course of the pandemic. And I do a lot of work working with families and young people and studying child development. They said, well, you can imagine that you're on an airplane and you're flying along in the airplane and then suddenly there's like a bump and everyone starts looking around. Oh my gosh, what's happening, right? Did the wing fall off? And then the pilot gets on and says something like, ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some turbulence. Everyone calms down. Okay, it's turbulence. We've checked in with air traffic control and we're going to take a slightly different flight path, but we're going to get you to your destination. We're just going to be there safely, but be a few minutes behind schedule. And please stay in your seat and don't move about the cabin. And then everyone's able to calm back down, go back to doing their crossword puzzles or their Sudoku puzzles, reading the paper. And what the pilot's done is that they've really set the tone that even in this difficult time of turbulence in the aircraft, when they're able to name it and begin to settle everybody down, then everyone themselves can start to settle down. Just that one person, everyone begins to calm down. So we can see this in the way that mindfulness trickles down between people, trickles across people, calming us all down during incredibly difficult times. We see all kinds of research on the ways that mindfulness begins to settle down the nervous system, especially during these times when we're anxious, going into fight or flight mode. And that blocks actually other important neurohormones in our brains. We have cortisol flowing through us when we're under this stress, and it blocks oxytocin, which is the chemical that actually allows us to feel safe, secure, attached to other people, to do the caregiving that we want to do. The brain's limbic system, the amygdala, activates and it shuts down actually the prefrontal cortex, where we think things through and we make good decisions. We solve complex problems. We're creative. That starts to get shut down. It shuts down the more social, loving parts of our brain, where we take other people's perspective, we have empathy, we have compassion, we understand where other people are coming from. And yet when we begin to practice mindfulness, even just a little bit each day, in both formal ways and informal ways, we reverse this cycle. We activate the prefrontal cortex, the insular cortex in the brain, where we can think things through and take other people's perspective, have more love and empathy, and act in kinder, in more generous ways. This starts to rewire our brains so that we actually grow new connections in these parts of our brains. Because we know in the research, it tells us that neurons that fire together wire together. My friend Sarah Lazar at Harvard Medical School has also scanned the brains of people when they practice mindfulness and found these incredible brain changes, actually making our brains younger than before we begin to practice mindfulness. They start to shift even the way our genes express themselves through epigenetics. Researchers from Johns Hopkins and other places have started to discover actually the ways that it activates certain gene sequences to communicate that the world is a safe place or a dangerous place, and that these can themselves get passed on to the next generation, even 3 degrees downward, 3 generations downward. So that when we start practicing mindfulness, even if we've been through difficult experiences in our lives, and our genes start to communicate that the world is a dangerous place and to go into fight or flight more readily, it actually starts to say, no, the world is an okay place. It's safe to connect with other people. It's safe to be generous and kind and sharing and mindful. And our grandchildren, the way their genetic material expresses itself is actually then different just because of our practice of mindfulness. We release serotonin, which regulates our mood and anxiety, oxytocin, that love hormone, dopamine, the feel-good reward neurotransmitter, when we start practicing mindfulness. Again, even just a little bit each day. So that over time, these practices are not just helpful for us, they certainly make us happier and more optimistic, but that ripples out to our friends and to our families around us. It trickles down across generations, so that a few practices each day start to make a difference, not just to us, but actually to our families, to our communities, to our societies, and perhaps even to the whole world, which is what we're starting to see in this new modern mindfulness movement that we've seen emerging, at least here in the US over the last 30 years, but of course you've had centuries, millennia of over in India, but to bring our cultures together, to bring the science and the scientific discoveries of the West together with these incredible ancient teachings that so many of us are speaking about today and this weekend is just so inspiring for creating, hopefully, a better, kinder, more generous, more mindful world going forward in the future. So I want to thank all of my co-presenters at this conference. I want to thank Dr. Chamoli, my old friend, and I look forward to hearing some of the other speakers and to be joining with you, even though it's in the middle of the night for me. It's a real pleasure to be here. So thank you all so much for your presence.